I was at the hospital picking up my own test results when I walked past my son's doctor's office. The specialist who had been overseeing his recovery since the accident nearly took him from us. Through the frosted glass, I saw a silhouette I recognized immediately. She had no appointment there that day. I stopped. I leaned close to the door that hadn't fully latched, and I heard her voice, calm, deliberate, discussing my son, like he was a transaction waiting to close. I could not believe what I was listening to. "I'm incredibly grateful you're here with me. To help me connect with this amazing community, please drop a comment letting me know which country or city you are watching from. Also, please note, this story includes fictional elements added for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual names or settings is coincidental, but the core message remains highly useful. They say retirement is supposed to feel like exhaling after holding your breath for 30 years. For me, it felt more like standing in a house that suddenly had too many rooms. My name is Victor Vance. I spent 25 years teaching geography at Portland State University, drawing maps on chalkboards, explaining fault lines and tectonic shifts to students who mostly cared more about their phones than the Pacific Ring of Fire. I retired 3 years ago at 64, moved back to my small house in the Selwood neighborhood on Portland's southeast side, and started learning what it meant to exist without a purpose that filled 8 hours of every day. My wife Carol had passed 2 years before I retired. Pancreatic cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the morning, I sat beside her bed holding her hand as she took her last breath. After she was gone, the house on Lambert Street felt like a museum, every room preserved exactly as she'd left it, her reading glasses still on the nightstand, her gardening gloves still hanging by the back door. What kept me going was Julian, our son, 28 years old, a structural engineer who spent his weekends climbing the rock faces of the Columbia River Gorge. He had Carol's eyes and my stubborn streak, which made for an interesting combination. He called me every Sunday without fail, and twice a week he'd stop by the house with takeout from the Thai place on Tacoma Street that we both pretended wasn't our guilty pleasure. Then 18 months ago he met Elena. She came into his life the way good things sometimes do, quietly, without announcement. He'd been working out at a gym in the Pearl District when he threw out his shoulder on the climbing wall. Elena was there. She helped him ice it down, laughed at his dramatic wincing, and apparently that was enough. 6 months later, they were married in a small ceremony at Hoyt Arboretum, surrounded by Douglas firs and a handful of close friends. I'll be honest with you, I liked Elena in the beginning. She was warm and attentive, always bringing food when she visited, always asking about my health, my garden, my old students. She called me Mr. Vance with a kind of genuine respect that made me feel seen rather than tolerated. Julian was happier than I'd watched him be in years, but 6 months ago everything changed. It was a Tuesday morning in May when the accident happened. Julian was driving to a job site in northeast Portland when a delivery truck ran a red light at an intersection on Northeast Broadway, a blind spot where the traffic camera had been reported faulty for weeks. The impact crushed the driver's side door. Julian survived, but his left leg was badly fractured and 2 vertebrae in his lower spine were compressed. The surgeons at OHSU called it lucky. I called it the worst day of my life since Carol. The legal case moved quickly. Julian's attorney negotiated with the trucking company's insurance. By September, a settlement of $4 million had been agreed upon, still pending final disbursement, expected within weeks. During those months of recovery, Elena was everything a devoted wife was supposed to be. She moved Julian into their home in the Irvington neighborhood, set up a recovery room, managed his medications, coordinated with his doctors. She even took a leave of absence from her marketing job to be with him full-time. Everyone who knew them said the same thing: Julian is so lucky to have her. But lately, something had been pulling at the back of my mind, like a loose thread on a sweater. Julian's voice on the phone had changed. Where he used to be sharp, quick with a joke or an opinion about whatever Portland sports franchise was disappointing us this season, he'd become slow. distant, like he was speaking to me from underwater. When I'd ask if he was okay, he'd say, "I'm fine, Dad. It's just the recovery. It wears you out." And Elena, if she happened to be nearby, would take the phone and tell me cheerfully that the doctors said fatigue was completely normal and I shouldn't worry. I worried. That Thursday afternoon, November 7th, I drove up to OHSU to collect the results of a routine blood panel my own doctor had ordered. Nothing serious, just the quarterly maintenance work that comes with being 67 years old and taking 2 different medications for blood pressure. I parked in the main garage off Sam Jackson Park Road and took the elevator up to the medical office building on the 3rd floor. I was on my way back out, results in hand, when I decided to stop at the vending machine near the orthopedic wing. Julian's primary treatment had been handled by an orthopedic specialist, here a Dr. Arthur Sterling, who came highly recommended and had overseen Julian's surgical recovery for the past 5 months. The hallway outside the orthopedic clinic was quiet that afternoon. Most of the staff had already started clearing out for the day. A handwritten sign hung on the door of Dr. Sterling's private office at the end of the hall, "Closed Staff Meeting." The kind of sign that tells you not to knock. I wasn't planning to knock. I was just walking past, but then I stopped. Through the long rectangular window set into the office door, the kind of frosted safety glass that blurs shapes but doesn't eliminate them entirely, I saw 2 figures standing close together. One of them was tall, broad-shouldered. The other was slender with dark hair pulled back. My chest tightened before my brain caught up with what my eyes were seeing. I knew that posture. I knew the way she stood with her weight shifted slightly to her left hip when she was focused on something. I'd watched her stand exactly that way at Julian's wedding, at our Sunday dinners, at the hospital, the morning after the accident, when she'd gripped my arm and told me Julian was going to be okay. Elena, I glanced at my watch. 4:52 in the afternoon. Julian's treatment schedule, as Elena had explained it to me more than once, was Tuesdays and Fridays only. Today was Thursday. There was no appointment today. No procedure, no follow-up, nothing that would bring Elena to this specific hallway, to this specific office on this specific afternoon. My pulse picked up. My feet stopped moving on their own. Elena had told me just this morning when I'd called to check on Julian that she was spending the afternoon running errands, dry cleaning, grocery shopping, maybe a stop at the pharmacy for Julian's prescriptions. She'd sounded perfectly relaxed. Cheerful, even. She was not at the dry cleaner. I stood there in that corridor, the fluorescent lights humming faintly above me, the sound of my own breathing suddenly very loud in my ears. Every professional instinct I'd spent a lifetime developing, 25 years of reading rooms, reading, people, reading the stories that maps could tell if you knew how to look, was screaming at me that something was wrong. I took one step closer to the door, and then through the narrow gap where the door hadn't quite latched shut, I heard Elena's voice, low, precise, and carrying the kind of calm that doesn't belong to someone dropping off a prescription. I leaned in, and I listened. The first thing I noticed was how calm her voice was. Not the careful calm of someone choosing their words. Not the strained calm of someone trying to hold themselves together. It was the calm of someone who had said these things before, rehearsed, precise, unbothered. The kind of calm that in 30 years of teaching, I'd only ever heard from students who had already decided they didn't care whether they passed or failed. The Linda Dawson situation resolved cleanly, Elena said. The property transferred without complications. Her retirement account cleared last Tuesday. A man's voice answered lower, measured with the clipped efficiency of someone accustomed to delivering information in examination rooms. Dr. Arthur Sterling. I recognized it from the handful of times I'd sat in his office while he explained Julian's recovery timeline to us. "And the disbursement?" he asked. "Still on schedule," Elena said. $4 million pending final paperwork, 2 weeks at the outside. I pressed my back against the wall beside the door, my heart hammering so hard I was genuinely afraid they'd hear it. My results envelope crinkled in my grip, and I forced myself to loosen my fingers to breathe through my nose, slow and quiet. 25 years of teaching teenagers had at least given me that the ability to stay still when everything inside me was screaming to move. "And the current protocol?" Arthur asked. "He's compliant," Elena said. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Compliant. She was talking about Julian, my son. "The Tuesday-Friday schedule is working. No one on staff is there past 5, so there's no interference with the adjustments." I heard the soft sound of something being set on a desk, a folder maybe, or a clipboard. "We should think about accelerating the timeline," Elena continued, her voice dropping half a register. "Once the funds clear, I don't want to be managing this longer than necessary. The situation with his father is becoming a complication." My breath stopped entirely. The situation with his father. She was talking about me. She went on correcting herself so smoothly I almost missed it. "Twice this week already. He's one of those men who trusts his gut more than he trusts reason. I'd rather wrap this up before he starts asking questions I can't answer," with a smile. Arthur made a sound, not quite a laugh, but something adjacent to it, dry and humorless. "The protocol is already at the upper threshold for his body weight," he said. "Pushing further without blood panel cover isn't something I'm comfortable with. We stay on schedule. 2 weeks. 2 weeks, Elena repeated. "Not a question, a confirmation." "I'll manage the Friday session myself," Arthur said. "Keep him calm, keep him comfortable. By the time the disbursement clears, everything will be in order." "Good." I heard Elena's heels shift on the floor, the small sound of her turning. "I should get back. He'll be wondering where I am." He. Julian. She spoke about my son the way you'd speak about a project timeline. About a shipment that needed to arrive on a particular date. My legs had gone completely numb from the knees down. I wasn't sure when that had happened. I was leaning against the wall so hard that the painted concrete was leaving an impression on my shoulder blade, and I hadn't noticed that either. Everything in my body had redirected itself to my ears, to the sounds coming through that 2-inch gap in the door. I heard footsteps, Elena moving toward the door. I pushed off the wall and walked. Not ran. Walked. Because running in a hospital hallway would draw attention, and drawing attention was the one thing I absolutely could not afford. I moved down the corridor at the pace of a man who was simply done with his appointment and heading back to the parking garage, results in hand, nothing unusual, nothing wrong. The elevator doors at the end of the hall opened as if they'd been waiting for me. I stepped in. The doors closed. And the moment they did, my knees buckled. I caught myself on the metal railing inside the elevator, both hands gripping it, staring at my own reflection in the brushed steel doors. The man looking back at me was gray-faced, wide-eyed, breathing in short, shallow bursts that fogged slightly in the air-conditioned cold. He looked like a man who had just watched the ground open up beneath his feet and was still trying to decide if he was falling. The elevator reached the parking level. The doors opened. I walked to my car, a 12-year-old Subaru Outback that Carol had insisted we buy because she said it was the only sensible vehicle for a Pacific Northwest winter. And I sat down in the driver's seat, and I gripped the steering wheel with both hands until my knuckles went white. Linda Dawson. I turned the name over in my mind. Who was Linda Dawson, the property transferred? Her retirement account cleared, resolved cleanly. Those were not the words of a caregiver talking about a patient. Those were the words of someone tallying a ledger. And Julian. Compliant. Adjustments. Upper threshold for his body weight. My son was being given something. Something Arthur Sterling was monitoring by body weight. Something that required a blood panel to cover up. And Elena was standing in that office in her neat dark coat talking about accelerating it. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out with shaking hands. A text message from Elena. The timestamp read 5:03 p.m., which meant she had sent it within minutes of finishing her conversation with Arthur Sterling before she'd even reached the elevator. The message read, "Hi, Mr. Vance, Julian says hi. He's having a good afternoon resting comfortably. Hope your appointment went well today." 3 exclamation points, a smiley face emoji, the warm, considerate daughter-in-law who thought of me even when she was busy. I stared at that message for a long time. 2 hours ago, that text would have made me feel grateful. It would have loosened something in my chest, the low-grade worry of a father who couldn't be there, reassured by the woman who was. 2 hours ago, I would have typed back, "Thanks, Elena, give him my love," and gone home and made myself a bowl of soup and watched the news. But Elena had sent that message from the same building where she'd just been standing, in a closed office, talking about accelerating a timeline on my son, like he was a line item in a business plan. Outside the car windows, the November rain had started up again. Portland in November means the sky pressing down low and gray, the streets slick and dark, the whole city folded into itself. I had lived here for 40 years, and I had never once found the rain threatening. Sitting in that parking garage with Elena's cheerful text glowing on my screen, I found it threatening now. I didn't text her back. I started the engine, pulled out of the space, and drove towards Selwood with both hands on the wheel, and a name I'd never heard before rolling around in my head like a loose coin in an empty drawer. Linda Dawson. I needed to know who she was. The rain had picked up by the time I pulled into my driveway on Martin Street. I sat in the car for a long moment, engine off, listening to the drops hammer the roof of my old Subaru, like someone was trying to get my attention. The porch light was on. I always left it on out of habit, even though there was nobody inside waiting for me anymore. Carol had been gone 4 years, and I still hadn't broken that habit. I didn't want to. I went inside, hung my coat on the rack by the door, and stood in the kitchen long enough to put a kettle on. The house smelled faintly of cedar and old books the way it always had, the way I hoped it always would. I poured myself a mug of chamomile tea and carried it to the small desk in the corner of the living room, the same desk where I'd graded geography exams for 22 years. Linda Dawson. The name sat in the middle of my mind like a stone dropped into still water. I couldn't shake it. The way Elena had said it, casual, almost dismissive, the way you'd mention a completed task on a to-do list, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Linda Dawson's situation resolved cleanly. Those were her exact words. What situation resolved how? I opened my laptop. For 22 years, I had taught at Portland State University, PSU, just across the river in the South Park blocks. When I retired in 2018, the university had kept my alumni faculty account active. It was a courtesy they extended to long-serving professors, access to the digital library, the academic archive portal, the continuing education database. I had used it mostly to read old geography journals and occasionally look up former students. Tonight I was going to use it for something else entirely. I typed my credentials into the PSU faculty alumni portal and held my breath until the dashboard loaded. "Come on," I muttered, watching the spinning wheel on the screen. My tea was getting cold. I didn't care. I started with a simple public search, Linda Dawson, Portland, Oregon, and got a handful of results. A LinkedIn profile, a real estate listing from 2021, an obituary. My stomach dropped. I clicked the obituary. Linda Mae Dawson, 64, of Beaverton, Oregon, passed away on March 3, 2023, following a brief illness. The write-up was short, the kind that gets filed quickly, without much detail. She had been a retired school librarian. She was survived by her son, Thomas. No mention of a daughter-in-law. No mention of a settlement. No mention of anything that would explain why Elena and Dr. Arthur Sterling were discussing her name in a hospital corridor like she was a closed file. My chest tightened. I pressed 2 fingers against my sternum the way my doctor always told me not to. Brief illness. Linda Dawson had been 64 years old. I pushed the search further. This time I went into the PSU Academic Archive, a database that stored conference papers, institutional presentations, and professional event records going back to the early 2000s. I had used it before to pull maps and geographic survey data. Now I typed in a different name, Arthur Sterling. 14 results came back. Journal articles mostly. A departmental seminar paper from 2017. And near the bottom of the list, a conference proceeding from the Pacific Northwest Medical and Financial Wellness Symposium, held in Seattle, Washington, in October 2019. I clicked it. The document loaded slowly, the way old PDFs always do. It was a formal program booklet, speaker bios panel listing session schedules. Dr. Arthur Sterling was listed as a panelist on the second day under a session titled Integrated Recovery Planning for Long-Term Injury Cases. His affiliation was listed as a private orthopedic practice in Portland. There was a photo. It was a group shot, the kind taken at every professional conference. 8 or 9 people standing in a loose row in front of a banner, half of them squinting against the overhead lights, all of them smiling the way people do when they're trying to look important. I almost scrolled past it. Then I saw her, second from the right. Dark hair pulled back, a slim navy blazer. She looked younger, maybe 28 or 29, and her smile was wide and confident and entirely unmistakably familiar. The caption beneath the photo listed the names left to right. I counted across slowly, my finger tracing the screen. Elena Dawson, Research Associate, Pacific Rim Consulting Group, Seattle, Washington. My mug tipped sideways, tea spread across the desk in a slow brown wave. I didn't move to stop it. Elena Dawson, not Elena Vance. Not the woman who had appeared in my son's life 2 years ago with a warm laugh and a handshake and a story about meeting Julian at his gym in the Pearl District. This was a woman named Elena Dawson, who had been standing shoulder to shoulder with Dr. Arthur Sterling at a medical and financial conference in Seattle a full year before she ever introduced herself to my family. My hands were trembling. I pressed them flat against the desk to make them stop. It didn't work. I had spent 22 years teaching my students to read maps, to understand that every line, every symbol, every carefully marked coordinate tells you something about where you are and where you're headed. What I was looking at right now was a map, too. A map I didn't want to believe. Elena had known Arthur Sterling before Julian's accident. She had been at a conference focused on injury cases and financial recovery planning. She had changed her last name when she married Julian. And somewhere in that web, a woman named Linda Dawson had died at 64 from a brief illness, and Elena had described her situation as having been resolved cleanly. I stood up from the desk so fast that my chair scraped back against the hardwood floor. I walked to the window and pressed my palm against the cold glass, staring at the rain falling in long silver threads beneath the streetlight outside. I needed to breathe. I needed to think. She knew him before the accident. The thought kept circling, relentless and cold. Elena had not stumbled into Julian's life by chance. She had not fallen in love with a man she met at a gym, and then coincidentally ended up under the care of a doctor she had never met before. This had been arranged, planned. The timing, Julian's accident in May, the $4 million settlement pending Arthur Sterling, conveniently becoming his primary physician, none of it was coincidence. I grabbed my phone off the desk and almost called Julian right then. My thumb hovered over his name in my contact list. I wanted to hear his voice. I wanted to tell him everything I'd just found. I wanted to say I don't know exactly what's happening, but something is very wrong. But I stopped myself. Because if I called Julian and Elena was nearby, and Elena was almost always nearby, I would tip my hand before I had anything solid enough to stand on. I had a photograph from a 5-year-old conference. I had a name in an obituary. I had the overheard fragment of a conversation in a hospital corridor. It wasn't enough. Not yet. I set the phone face down on the desk, pulled the keyboard back toward me, and opened a new search window. This time I typed Elena Dawson, Pacific Rim Consulting Group, Seattle. The results loaded. I leaned forward, jaw-tight, eyes burning from staring at the screen in the dim light. Outside, the rain kept falling on Selwood. And somewhere across the river in the Irvington neighborhood, my son was sleeping in a house that no longer felt safe to me, in a bed I had no idea how to get him out of. I had not slept. Not really. I had closed my laptop sometime around midnight. After 2 hours of searching, turned up almost nothing useful about Pacific Rim Consulting Group beyond a sparse website that hadn't been updated since 2020 and a mailing address in Seattle that, when I mapped it, corresponded to a UPS store on Eastlake Avenue. A mail drop. Not an office. Not a real company. I had lain down on top of the covers with my clothes still on and stared at the ceiling until the gray light of a Portland November morning started bleeding through the curtains. My mind had not stopped moving the entire night. It kept circling back to the same points, the same connections, the same photograph, Elena Dawson, standing next to Arthur Sterling in Seattle, 5 years before she became Elena Vance. By 7 a.m., I was in the kitchen standing at the counter with a cup of black coffee, watching the rain streak down the window above the sink. Carol had always teased me about my coffee. "Victor, you drink it like it's medicine," she used to say, pressing her lips together to hide a smile. She wasn't wrong. This morning, it was exactly that. I had made a decision somewhere between 3 a.m. and dawn. I needed to see the house on Stanton Street for myself, not to go inside, not to knock on the door, just to look. I had spent 22 years teaching people how to read the world through geography. How a building's position relative to a road, a rail line, a natural feature tells you something real about the people inside it. Julian had mentioned once, back when he and Elena first moved into the Irvington house, that the master bedroom looked out over the backyard toward the east. "You can hear the freight trains in the morning, Dad," he had told me, laughing. "Takes some getting used to." I drove across the Hawthorne Bridge just before 8:30, the Willamette gray and swollen beneath me, and made my way up into the northeast neighborhoods. Irvington is one of Portland's older residential districts, wide streets lined with mature oaks and craftsman bungalows, the kind of neighborhood that feels settled and permanent in a way that newer parts of the city don't. Julian had been proud of that house. He had saved for the down payment for 3 years. I parked on Northeast 7th Avenue, half a block north of Stanton Street, and cut the engine. From where I sat, I had a clear line of sight to the front of the house, a 2-story craftsman with a wide front porch and dark green trim that Julian had repainted himself the summer before the accident. The porch light was still on, even though it was past 8 in the morning. The curtains on both front windows were drawn. I wrapped both hands around my travel mug and watched. Elena's car, a silver Audi A4, was parked in the driveway. That meant she was home. Julian's truck, a dark blue F-150 he'd driven since his mid-20s, was parked behind it. Neither car had moved recently. Both had a fine film of rain and dew across the hoods that told me they hadn't been started since at least the night before. For 40 minutes, nothing happened. A neighbor walked a golden retriever past the end of the block. A mail truck rolled slowly along the cross street. The rain eased to a fine mist that the wind pushed sideways through the bare oak branches overhead. I checked the clock on the dashboard. 8:47 a.m. I rolled my neck and told myself I'd give it another 15 minutes. Then at 8:52 a.m. I saw it. A light came on in the upper right window of the house. The room I knew faced east, the one Julian had described. The light was faint, the kind that comes from a bedside lamp rather than an overhead fixture, and it lasted only about 30 seconds before it went out again. But in those 30 seconds, I saw a shadow move across the curtain. A single figure, standing, then sitting back down. My throat tightened. Julian was in that room. 3 minutes later, at 8:55, the low, long moan of a Union Pacific freight train rolled through the neighborhood from the northeast. The tracks ran along Northeast 10th Avenue, less than 6 blocks away, a route I knew by heart, from years of teaching students to read Portland's industrial geography. The whistle called twice, a deep sound that traveled through the damp morning air and rattled the loose trim around my car window. And I thought about what Elena had told me 11 days ago when I'd called to ask if I could come by and visit Julian. "He's not at the house right now, Victor," she had said, her voice smooth and patient the way it always was when she was redirecting me. "He's spending a few weeks at a wellness center out near Hillsborough. The doctors think the change of environment will help with his recovery. I'll let him know you called." Hillsborough. That was 20 miles west of Portland. No freight trains. No Union Pacific line running through quiet neighborhoods at 9 in the morning. Julian was not in Hillsborough. Julian had never been in Hillsborough. My son was 50 yards away from me behind a curtain in a room he apparently couldn't leave on his own. And his wife had lied to my face without blinking. I set my coffee mug down in the cup holder very carefully because my hand had started to shake badly enough that I didn't trust myself not to spill it. I pressed the back of my head against the headrest and breathed slow, deliberate, the way I used to coach myself through the anxiety that came in the first years after Carol died, when the house was too quiet and the nights felt like they went on forever. Don't react, think. It was something I had told my students 100 times when they were reading a map that didn't make sense to them. When the geography contradicted what you expected to see, you didn't panic, and you didn't guess. You gathered more data. You verified. You built the picture piece by piece until the truth of the landscape revealed itself. I picked up my notebook from the passenger seat, a green moleskin I'd used for field observations since my second year of teaching back in 2001, and I wrote down exactly what I had seen and heard. The time the bedroom light came on. The shadow behind the curtain. The freight train at 8:55. The exact coordinates of Elena's lie. Then I wrote 2 words at the bottom of the page, underlined them, and circled them twice. Not alone. I could not do this by myself. I had a photograph from a conference archive and a freight train whistle, and the cold certainty spreading through my chest that something was very, very wrong with my son's life. But certainty without evidence was just fear. And fear on its own wouldn't save Julian. I needed someone who understood how to turn observations into action. Someone who had spent a career doing exactly that. I started the car and pulled away from the curb, heading south toward the Burnside Bridge. The Willamette was waiting for me on the other side, and on the other side of that, a phone number I hadn't dialed in over 3 years, saved under a name that meant safety, reliability, and the particular kind of calm that only comes from someone who has seen the worst of what people do to each other and kept going anyway. Raymond Shaw, former Portland PD, my oldest friend. I pressed the call button before I'd even made it to the on-ramp. The smell of coffee and warm pastry hit me the moment I pushed open the door, and for just a second, one single treacherous second, it felt like an ordinary Saturday morning. Café Nell was the kind of place that had been on Northwest 21st Avenue long enough to feel like part of the neighborhood's bones. Dark wood paneling, mismatched chairs, a chalkboard menu above the counter, with half the specials written in someone's careful cursive. The windows were fogged with warmth from the inside, and the rain against the glass outside made the whole room feel sealed off from the rest of the world. On any other weekend, Carol and I used to come here after our Saturday errands. She'd order a lavender latte, and I'd get a plain Americano, and we'd argue pleasantly about whatever we'd read in the paper that week. Today I was sitting alone at a corner table. My laptop open, my moleskin notebook beside it, and my hands wrapped around a coffee that had gone lukewarm 10 minutes ago. I was watching the door. Raymond Shaw walked in at 9:11. I had known Raymond for going on 30 years. Our daughters had been in the same 3rd grade class at Abernethy Elementary, back before Carol and I moved to Selwood. And what started as a school pickup acquaintance had turned over decades into the kind of friendship that doesn't need much maintenance to stay solid. Raymond was 68, a year older than me, with a broad, unhurried way of moving that I had always associated with people who had seen enough in their careers not to be rattled by much. He had spent 26 years with Portland PD, the last 12 in the Financial Crimes Unit, where he had made a specialty of tracing money through shell companies' fraudulent investment schemes, and what he liked to call the long con dressed up in a nice suit. He had retired 5 years ago. His wife Diane had been after him to slow down for a decade before that. He spotted me across the cafe, raised one hand in a short wave, and made his way over without stopping at the counter. That told me something. Raymond always got his coffee first. If he was skipping that step, he'd already decided this was serious. "Victor." He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down, setting a worn leather folio on the table between us. His expression was composed, but his eyes sharp and gray, the eyes of a man who had spent years watching people decide whether to lie to him, were focused and alert. "You sounded like hell on the phone yesterday." "I feel like hell," I said honestly. My voice came out rougher than I intended. "I haven't slept properly in 2 nights. Show me what you've got." I turned the laptop toward him and walked him through everything. The OHO corridor, the conversation I'd overheard, the PSU archive, searched the photograph from the 2019 Seattle conference, the obituary for Linda Dawson, the freight train on Friday morning, Elena's lie about Hillsborough. I spoke quietly and steadily, the way I used to present lectures, making sure I laid the pieces out in the right order. Raymond didn't interrupt. He leaned forward with his elbows on the table and looked at each item carefully, his jaw set, his eyes moving slowly across the screen. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and was quiet for a moment. Not passive, Raymond was never passive, but the particular kind of deliberate quiet that meant he was organizing his thoughts before he opened his mouth. "The woman in the photo," he said finally. "Elena Dawson. You're certain it's her?" "I taught geography for 22 years, Raymond. I spent my career training myself to read faces the same way I trained my students to read terrain." I tapped the screen. "That's her. Same bone structure, same posture, same way she holds her chin up slightly when she wants to look confident. She dyed her hair, and she's 5 years older, but that is Elena." Raymond nodded slowly. He reached across and zoomed in on the conference photo himself, studying it the way a man studies a map he doesn't entirely trust yet. Then he opened his leather folio and took out a single printed page, a document I couldn't read from my angle, and placed it on the table between us. "I pulled some old case files last night," he said, "from my time in financial crimes. Before I left the department, we had 2 open investigations into what we internally called recovery fraud schemes, targeting personal injury settlement recipients. The pattern was consistent. A facilitator gets close to the victim shortly after the injury, manages their medical care through a complicit provider, and establishes financial control before the settlement disbursement. The money gets moved before the victim or their family realizes what's happened. My chest felt like something heavy had been placed on top of it. And Linda Dawson. Raymond's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "I can't confirm Linda Dawson specifically without pulling the full case file, and I don't have active access to the department database anymore. But the name doesn't ring a bell from my time there, which means if she was a victim, it either happened in a different jurisdiction or it was handled after I retired." He paused. "Or it was handled so cleanly that it never became a case. Resolved cleanly." Elena's words from the OHSU corridor came back to me like a cold draft under a door. "What about Julian?" I asked. My voice had dropped. I hadn't meant it to, but it had. If someone were doing this to Julian, managing his recovery, controlling what he eats and drinks, keeping him isolated, what would that look like medically? Raymond put both hands flat on the table. He looked at me directly the way he used to look at witnesses when he was about to tell them something they didn't want to hear. Victor, the symptoms you described, the cognitive fogginess, the unusual fatigue, the emotional flatness, the way he repeats himself on the phone, those are consistent with prolonged exposure to a class of compounds used legitimately in post-surgical recovery management. Sedatives, muscle relaxants, certain combinations of sleep induction agents. In the right doses, administered consistently over weeks or months, they keep a person functional enough to sign documents and answer questions, but not sharp enough to question what they're signing or who they're trusting. The coffee cup in my hand wasn't empty, but I set it down because my grip had tightened enough that I was afraid of breaking it. He would still seem okay to someone who didn't know him well. Yes, Raymond said. To a casual observer, a doctor doing a routine check, a friend who visits once a month, he would seem like a man recovering slowly from a serious injury. Tired. Grateful for the people taking care of him. Maybe a little distant. He paused. But to his father, who has known him his whole life, he doesn't sound like himself, I said. My throat had gone tight. I pressed my lips together for a second before I could continue. He hasn't sounded like himself in months. Julian is sharp. He's funny. He argues with me about football scores, and he remembers the name of every mountain he's ever climbed. The last 4 times I've called him, he's been flat. Like the light behind his eyes had been turned down. Raymond reached across the table and put one hand briefly on my forearm. It was a small gesture, but from Raymond it meant a great deal. Then your instincts are right, he said quietly. And your instincts have never been wrong in 30 years. I blinked hard. My eyes had gone hot, and I was not going to cry in Café Nell on a Saturday morning, so I picked up the lukewarm coffee and took a long sip, and stared at the fogged window for a moment, until the feeling passed. What do I need, I asked. To go to the police. What do I actually need? Raymond leaned back and crossed his arms. He was back in professional mode now. I could see the shift, the slight straightening of his posture, the way his voice became measured and precise. You need documented evidence of financial control. Bank records, wire transfers, account changes, something that shows money moving in a pattern that benefits Elena or Sterling directly. You need medical documentation, blood work, prescription records that supports the theory of deliberate chemical administration. And ideally, you need a second victim, a pattern. 1 case is a dispute. 2 cases is a scheme. Linda Dawson, I said. If she was a victim, yes. Her son Thomas, if he exists and if he's willing to talk, could be critical. Raymond tapped his folio. But Victor listened to me carefully. You cannot go to the house. You cannot confront Elena directly. If she knows you're suspicious, Julian's situation could change very quickly, and not in a direction that helps him. You need to move carefully, and you need to document everything. I nodded. My jaw was tight. I wanted to get in my car and drive straight to Stanton Street and pound on that front door until someone answered. Every cell in my body wanted exactly that. But Raymond was right, and I knew he was right, and being right about something you hate is one of the worst feelings there is. I'll be careful, I said. Raymond studied me for a long moment, the way he used to study witnesses to see if they meant what they said. Whatever he found in my face apparently satisfied him, because he gave a short nod and picked up his folio. I'll make some calls this weekend, he said, standing. Informal, off the record. I still know people in financial crimes who owe me favors. He picked up his coat from the back of the chair and paused. And Victor, get some sleep. I mean it. You can't think straight on no sleep, and right now your brain is the most important tool you've got. He clapped me once on the shoulder, the kind of solid, no-nonsense gesture that said, I'm with you, and walked out into the rain on Northwest 21st Avenue. I sat at the corner table alone for a long time after he left, staring at the conference photograph still open on my laptop screen. Elena Dawson. Second from the right, her chin lifted, her smile wide, standing next to a man who was now my son's doctor. My phone buzzed on the table. A text message. From Julian's number. Dad, I'm fine. Elena says you've been worried. No need. I'm doing great. 3 sentences. No punctuation mistakes, which Julian always made. No abbreviations, which Julian always used. No mention of mountains or weather or the Blazers' latest loss, which Julian always brought up. Fine. Great. No need. I stared at those 3 sentences for a long time. Then I closed my laptop, tucked my moleskin under my arm, and walked out into the rain. My son had not written that message. I was sure of it the way I was sure of longitude and latitude, the way I was sure that a freight train running northeast through Irvington at 9 in the morning does not pass through Hillsborough. Some things you simply know. The weekend had felt like wading through wet concrete. After leaving Café Nell on Saturday, I had driven home, made a sandwich I didn't eat, and spent the afternoon going through every financial document. I still had access to the 401k statements from before the power of attorney. Transfer the property deed on the Selwood house, the records of the retirement account. Carol and I had built together over 4 decades of careful, unglamorous saving. I had spread everything across the kitchen table and gone through it the way I used to grade papers, methodically, page by page, looking for the line where something stopped making sense. The line was everywhere. The 401k had been redirected through a financial management firm I had never heard of. Crestline Capital Advisors, to an account I didn't recognize. I had signed it during a difficult week, the anniversary of Carol's passing, a bad cold that had kept me foggy for days, and Elena had explained it as a routine document to help manage Julian's medical expenses while he was incapacitated. I had trusted her because she was my son's wife. Because I was 67 years old and grieving and tired, and she had handed me a pen and smiled and said it was just paperwork. I had spent Saturday night sitting at the kitchen table staring at those documents until my eyes ached, and Sunday had been worse, a long, gray, rain-soaked day in which I had done nothing useful except call Raymond twice and leave messages that he hadn't yet returned, and pace the length of my living room approximately 400 times, and stand at the back window looking at Carol's garden, which I had let go too long, and which now looked bare and defeated in the November cold. By Sunday evening I had made chamomile tea, turned on the reading lamp in the corner, and sat down with a geography journal. I had no intention of actually reading. It was just something to hold. Something to keep my hands still. My phone rang at 9:47 p.m. I looked at the screen. Julian Vance. My heart lurched so hard I nearly dropped the phone. I had called Julian's number 17 times over the past month, and reached Elena every single time, always with a smooth explanation. He's resting, he's in therapy, he had a difficult day, I'll have him call you back, and he never called back. Not once. In 4 weeks. I answered before the second ring finished. Julian, a pause. Then his voice. Rough and uncertain, like a man surfacing from deep water, but unmistakably, achingly his. Dad? The word came out in a single exhale, like he'd been holding it for a long time. Dad, I don't know what's wrong with me. My throat closed completely. I gripped the phone with both hands and pressed it hard against my ear, as if I could pull him through the line by sheer force of will. Julian, hey, I'm here. I'm right here, son. I feel strange. His voice was slow, slightly slurred at the edges, the way someone sounds when they're fighting through exhaustion that goes deeper than one bad night. I keep forgetting things. Not like normal forgetting. Like whole days just aren't there. I woke up this morning and I thought it was still October. My chest cracked open. I pressed my free hand flat against my sternum and breathed carefully through my nose. I needed to stay calm. If I fell apart right now, Julian would hear it, and it would frighten him, and frightened people in fragile states, don't think clearly. I had to be steady. I had to be the anchor. Okay, I said, keeping my voice even with everything I had. Okay, son, that's okay. How are you feeling right now at this moment? Clearer than I have in, I don't know. A while. A pause. I could hear him breathing uneven and shallow. Robert knocked something over in the hallway earlier. Something of Elena's. She was upset about it. But after that, I started feeling more like myself. Is that weird? Robert. The 9-year-old boy had knocked something over. Something of Elena's. The diffuser. It had to be the diffuser. I knew about ultrasonic diffusers, small whisper-quiet devices that disperse essential oils into the air as a fine mist. They were common in recovery and wellness settings. I had even considered buying one for Carol during her last winter. In the right context, they were entirely innocuous. In the wrong hands, with the wrong compound, loaded into the water reservoir, they were an invisible, odorless, continuous delivery system for anything you wanted to put into the air of a closed room. Robert had knocked it over. The compound had stopped circulating, and within a few hours, whatever had been keeping my son's mind wrapped in fog had started slowly, imperfectly to lift. It's not weird, I said. My voice was steady. My eyes were burning. Julian, listen to me. Can you talk for a few minutes? Is Elena in the room with you? No. She's given Robert his bath. She's going to be upset about the thing he broke. A pause. Dad, can I ask you something? Anything. My jaw tightened so hard I heard it. I made myself breathe before I spoke. Don't worry about that right now, I said carefully. We're going to figure all of that out together. The most important thing right now is you. How's your leg? How's your back? They hurt, he said, and the simplicity of it, the flat matter-of-fact honesty of it, broke something in me that I hadn't known was still intact. Julian had always said they hurt about injuries, the same way other people said it's raining as plain fact no drama. That was my son. That was the boy who had come home from a broken collarbone at 13 and told me it was just kind of annoying. They always hurt. But that's not the thing that scares me, Dad. What scares you? A long pause. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to just above a whisper, and I had to press the phone so hard against my ear that it hurt. I feel like I've been somewhere else, he said. Like I've been watching my own life from the other side of a window. And I don't know how to get back to the right side. I closed my eyes. One tear went down my face before I could stop it, and I let it go because there was no one in my living room to see it. You're going to get back, I said. I promise you that, Julian. I am going to bring you back. Do you hear me? Dad, a sound in the background. A door opening. Then Elena's voice, warm, bright, utterly composed, calling Julian's name from down the hallway. I have to go, Julian said quickly. The clarity in his voice was already dimming like a signal losing strength. Dad, I love you, I said. Go. It's okay. I love you. The call ended at 9:53 p.m. I sat in the reading chair for a long time without moving. The geography journal had slid off my lap onto the floor, and I didn't pick it up. The reading lamp cast a small yellow circle of light across the rug, and outside the window the rain had stopped for the first time in 2 days, leaving the street below so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. 6 minutes. I had had 6 minutes with my son, and in those 6 minutes everything had changed. I reached for my moleskin and wrote down everything. Every word Julian had said, the time, the duration of the call, the detail about Robert and the broken object, the question about the house. My hand moved across the page quickly, and without elegance, the handwriting of a man writing against time. Then I underlined the detail about Robert and the diffuser twice, and wrote the word evidence next to it in block letters. Then I sat back and thought about what Raymond had told me the day before. You need documented evidence of financial control. You need medical documentation. And ideally, you need a second victim. I had Julian's voice now. I had his words. I had the question about the house which told me that somewhere beneath the fog, my son's mind was still fighting, still reaching for the truth. I picked up my phone and opened it to the contact I had been avoiding for 2 days, the number Raymond had texted me on Saturday afternoon after our meeting at Cafe Nell, along with a single line of text, "When you're ready." He's good people. The contact name read Detective Marcus Brody, Portland PD, Financial Crimes. I stared at it for a long time. Then I set the phone face up on the armrest, closed my eyes, and made myself wait until morning. Because tomorrow was Monday. And Monday was when everything was going to have to change. I was up before 6, not because an alarm woke me. I had barely slept again, lying on top of the covers the way I had every night since Thursday, my mind running through the same sequence of facts, the way water finds the same channel through stone. By 5:45 a.m., the November sky outside the bedroom window had gone from black to the particular shade of dark gray that Portland wears in November, like a second skin, and I gave up the pretense of resting and got up. I made coffee. Real coffee this time, not chamomile tea, not something gentle. I needed to be sharp. I ground the beans the way Julian had taught me 3 Christmases ago when he'd given me a hand grinder and a bag of Stumptown beans and said, "Dad, you've been drinking bad coffee your whole life, and I'm not going to let you keep doing it." I had laughed at the time. Now the smell of fresh ground coffee in my kitchen at 6 in the morning was its own kind of ache. I called the number at 7:52 a.m. It rang twice. Then a voice measured alert, the voice of a man who was clearly already at his desk, answered. "Brody, Detective Brody," I said. "My name is Victor Vance. Raymond Shaw gave me your number. I believe you may be expecting my call." A brief pause. "Mr. Vance?" His tone shifted slightly, not warmer exactly, but more present, focused. "Raymond called me Saturday evening. I've been waiting to hear from you. Can you come in this afternoon?" I was in my car by 8. The central precinct of the Portland Police Bureau sits on Southwest 2nd Avenue in downtown Portland, a few blocks south of Burnside, a solid institutional building that has the no-nonsense look of a place where serious work gets done without a great deal of ceremony. I had driven past it hundreds of times over the years without ever needing to go inside. I sat in the visitor parking for a moment before I got out my hands on the steering wheel, telling myself to breathe. Raymond had told me Brody was good people. Raymond's judgment had never failed me in 30 years. I went inside. Detective Marcus Brody met me in the lobby at 1:15 p.m. He was younger than I had expected, early 40s, lean with the kind of contained economical energy that reminded me of the best students I'd ever had, the ones who didn't waste motion, who listened before they spoke, and who never wrote something down unless they meant to use it. He was wearing a gray jacket over a plain white shirt, no tie, a small Portland PD badge clipped to his belt. He shook my hand with a firm, brief grip and led me through a security door to a small conference room on the 2nd floor. The room had a table, 4 chairs, a whiteboard, and a window that looked out over a gray courtyard. Brody set a manila folder on the table between us and sat down across from me without preamble. "Raymond gave me the broad strokes," he said. "I want to hear it directly from you. Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." So I told him. All of it from the Thursday corridor at OHSU to the PSU archive, to the freight train on Friday morning, to the meeting with Raymond, to Sunday night's phone call with Julian, to the financial documents I had found spread across my kitchen table. I had brought everything with me, printed copies of the conference photograph, a photocopy of the POA document, the 401k statements showing the transfer to Crestline Capital Advisors, my handwritten notes from the moleskin. I laid each item on the table in order the same way I had at Cafe Nell, but this time with the addition of 6 days of accumulated dread. Brody listened without interrupting. He made notes on a yellow legal pad, quick sparse marks the shorthand of someone who had done this many times. His expression remained even throughout, but I noticed that his pen stopped moving twice, once when I mentioned Crestline Capital Advisors, and once when I said the name Elena Dawson. When I finished, he sat back and looked at the materials on the table for a long moment. Crestline Capital Advisors, he said. He tapped the folder he'd brought in with him. We know that name. My pulse jumped. You know it. Came up 18 months ago in a separate investigation. A financial fraud case involving misappropriated insurance proceeds in Clackamas County. He opened the folder and slid a single page across the table toward me. It was a corporate filing document, the LLC registration, for Crestline Capital Advisors, filed with the Delaware Secretary of State. The registered agent's name was listed as a law firm in Wilmington. The beneficial owner line was blank. Delaware LLCs don't require disclosure of beneficial ownership at the state level, Brody explained, reading my expression correctly. That's why they're popular for this kind of structure. The actual owner can stay invisible unless we go through the federal disclosure process, which takes time and a court order. I looked at the document. My jaw was tight. So whoever set this up knew exactly how to hide themselves. Yes, Brody said. That's not something a first-timer figures out on their own. This was built by someone who either has legal expertise or paid for it. He paused. Does the name Derek Foss mean anything to you? I shook my head. No, should it? Brody made a note. We'll come back to that. He reached into the folder again and slid a second item across the table. It was a photograph. 8 by 10, printed on standard copy paper, slightly grainy, in the way that surveillance-quality images always are, but clear enough. It showed two people sitting across from each other at a small cafe table. A window behind them, daylight winter light. The man was unmistakably Dr. Arthur Sterling. Same receding hairline, same rectangular glasses I had seen in the OHSU corridor. The woman across from him had her back partially turned to the camera, but the dark hair, the posture, the way she held her chin, I recognized her immediately. When was this taken? I asked. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. January 14th of this year, Brody said. A cafe on Northwest Lovejoy Street. It was captured by the exterior camera of the building next door during routine monitoring connected to a separate investigation. We pulled it when Crestline's name came up again last month. He looked at me directly. Mr. Vance, the woman in this photograph, is registered with the Oregon DMV under the name Elena Reyes Vance. She obtained an Oregon driver's license in that name in March 2023, approximately 6 months before your son's accident. The room felt smaller. Elena Reyes, I repeated. That appears to be a name she used between her previous legal identity and her current one. Brody's voice was careful, precise. We've been running a parallel records check since Raymond called me Saturday. The marriage certificate for Elena and Julian Vance filed in Multnomah County in October 2022 lists her legal name as Elena Marie Reyes. Prior to that, he paused and looked at his notes. We found a real property record in King County, Washington, that's Seattle from 2019, listing an Elena Ann Dawson as a party to a lease agreement for a commercial space. Elena Dawson, Elena Reyes, Elena Vance, 3 names, 1 woman. A trail of identities that began in Seattle the same year she had stood next to Arthur Sterling at a conference on injury settlements and financial recovery planning. My hands were flat on the table. I was pressing them down deliberately because if I didn't, they were going to shake, and I was not going to let that happen in front of a man I needed to take me seriously. She's done this before, I said. It wasn't a question. Brody met my eyes. We don't have confirmation of that yet. What I can tell you is that the pattern you've described, a facilitator, establishing close personal contact with an injury victim, managing their medical care through a complicit provider, and establishing financial control prior to settlement. Disbursement is a documented scheme. It has a name in financial crimes investigation. We call it recovery fraud. He paused. Raymond mentioned that you'd already heard that term. He described it to me on Saturday. Raymond is thorough. Something close to appreciation crossed Brody's face briefly. Here's where we are, Mr. Vance. I can open a formal preliminary investigation based on what you've brought me today, the POA, transfer the Crestline connection, the photographic evidence of Elena and Sterling's prior relationship. But I need to be honest with you about the timeline. I nodded. Tell me. The settlement disbursement for Julian's injury claim the $4 million is scheduled to process in 14 days. He said it flatly without drama, the way professionals deliver bad news. Once that money moves into an account controlled by Elena recovering, it becomes significantly more complicated. It doesn't become impossible, but it becomes a different kind of case. Right now, with the disbursement pending, we have a window to act before the primary financial harm is completed. He looked at me steadily. I need you to understand that 14 days is not a lot of time. 14 days. I thought about Julian's voice on the phone the night before. The fog in it. The question about the house. The way he had said, I feel like I've been watching my own life from the other side of a window. What do you need from me? I asked. Brody pulled the yellow legal pad in front of him and picked up his pen. Everything you have. Every document, every note, every date and time and name. And if there is any way to get medical records, Julian's actual prescription history, the name of every provider who has been involved in his care, that will be critical. He paused. There's one more thing. You mentioned a woman named Linda Dawson. I want to run that name against our open and closed case files. It may take a day or two, but if there's a prior victim with a documented connection to Elena or Sterling, that changes the entire weight of what we're building. He said we're building, 2 words. But they hit me somewhere in the center of my chest, like a warm hand pressed flat, the first real sense I had had in 6 days that I was not entirely alone in this. I slid the entire folder of documents across the table to him. It's yours, I said. Brody picked it up and looked at me with the level, calm expression of a man who has spent 20 years watching people decide whether to trust him. Mr. Vance, he said, I want you to go home, eat something, and let me work. Don't contact Elena. Don't go near the Irvington house. Don't discuss this with anyone other than Raymond. He paused. And keep your phone on. Your phone. I stood up and shook his hand. His grip was the same as it had been in the lobby, firm and brief, no performance to it. I was almost to the door when he spoke again. Mr. Vance. I turned. Brody had his pen in his hand and was looking at me with an expression I couldn't entirely read, not sympathy exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that said he understood the weight of what I was carrying better than most people would. Raymond said you were a geography teacher. 22 years, I said. He said you told him once that every map has blank spaces, places that haven't been charted yet. And that the blank spaces are the most important part, because that's where the real territory is. I looked at him for a moment. I did say that. Yes. We're about to chart the blank spaces, he said quietly. Give me a few days. I walked out of the central precinct and into the gray November afternoon. And for the first time since Thursday, the cold air on my face felt like something other than just weather. It felt like the first moment before a map starts to make sense. The moment when the lines stop being lines and start being roads that lead somewhere real. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Raymond. He's the best I know. You did the right thing. I typed back 2 words and kept walking. I know. Monday night had given me something I hadn't had in almost a week. Not sleep exactly, but a kind of purposeful stillness. The meeting with Brody had done that. It had taken the formless dread I'd been carrying since Thursday and given it edges, given it a shape I could work with. There was a timeline now. There was a plan. There was someone on the other side of this who knew what they were doing. That didn't make Tuesday morning easy, but it made it possible. At 10:12 a.m., Elena's silver Audi backed out of the driveway on Stanton Street. I sat forward. Through the rear window of the Audi in the back seat, I could make out a figure seated upright, but still the way someone sits when movement hurts them. The shape of the shoulders, the angle of the head. I had watched my son sit in the back seat of cars his entire life from the booster seat days all the way through his 20s, and I knew the particular way he carried himself slightly forward, chin down, like he was perpetually thinking about something. It was Julian. I wrote 10:12 a.m. in the moleskin and drew a line connecting it to the box. Then I waited 10 more minutes watching the street. The neighbor with the golden retriever appeared at the far end of the block, walked the length of it, and disappeared around the corner. No other movement from the house. No lights coming on or going off. No second car in the driveway. At 10:23 a.m. I got out of the Subaru. I had the key in my jacket pocket. A plain brass house key on a small Portland Trailblazers keychain that Julian had given me in the spring of 2023, 2 months after he and Elena moved into the Irvington house. "For emergencies, Dad," he had said, pressing it into my hand. "Just don't use it to show up unannounced and reorganize my bookshelves." I had laughed. I had kept the key in the small dish by my front door ever since, and I had never once used it. Until today. I walked up the front path at a normal pace the way a man walks to the front door of a house he has a key to, which is exactly what I was. I did not rush. I did not look around. I unlocked the front door, pushed it open, stepped inside, and closed it quietly behind me. The house smelled wrong. It took me a moment to identify it. Not bad exactly. Not the smell of neglect or uncleanliness, but clinical. Faintly medicinal the way a physical therapy office smells or a hospital supply room. There was something underneath it that I couldn't name, something faintly sweet that reminded me of the waiting rooms I had spent too many hours in during Carol's last year. It sat in the back of my throat and didn't leave. I stood in the front hallway and looked around. The living room to my left was neat, too neat. The kind of neat that happens when someone controls an environment rather than lives in it. The furniture was pushed slightly out of its natural positions, angled toward the center, rather than settled in the comfortable, slightly asymmetrical arrangement that people develop naturally over time. The coffee table had nothing on it. No books, no remotes, no half-finished mug of coffee, none of the ordinary debris of a life being lived. Julian, before the accident, had always had at least 4 things on the coffee table. He was that kind of person. I moved through the living room and up the stairs. The master bedroom was at the end of the hallway door, slightly ajar. I pushed it open with 2 fingers and stepped inside. The room was dim, the curtains were drawn, the same curtains I had seen from outside on Friday morning. The bed was made with institutional precision, the kind you see in hospital rooms rather than homes. On the nightstand, Julian's side, a glass of water, a phone charger, a small pill organizer with 6 compartments each, labeled with a day of the week in Elena's handwriting. 2 of the compartments were empty. 4 were full. I took out my phone and photographed the pill organizer from 3 angles. Then I turned to the other side of the room. In the corner against the wall was something I had not expected, a small mini refrigerator, the kind college students keep in dorm rooms. It was white, humming quietly, and it had a 4-digit combination lock looped through the door handle. The lock was small, a standard luggage lock, the kind you could buy at any hardware store, but it was a lock on a refrigerator in a married couple's bedroom. I crouched down and looked at it without touching it. Through the ventilation gap at the bottom of the fridge door, I could see the corner of a label. Dark green text on a white background. I angled my phone camera through the gap and took 3 photographs, adjusting the angle until I had a clear shot of the label. The brand name was not one I recognized, not Gatorade, not Pedialyte, not any of the standard recovery drinks. The label read, Clear Flow Performance Recovery Professional Series, and beneath it in smaller text, for clinical use only. Not for retail sale. For clinical use only. My chest felt like someone had placed a brick on it and was pressing down. I stood up and moved to the closet. On the shelf above the hanging clothes behind a stack of Julian's old climbing gear, his harnesses, his chalk bag, the carabiner collection he'd been building since his 20s, I found a manila envelope, unsealed. I opened it with 2 fingers and looked inside without removing the contents. 3 documents. I photographed each one through the open envelope. The first was a mortgage document. My name was at the top, Victor William Vance, and the property listed was my house on Martin Street in Selwood. The document indicated that a lien had been placed against the property in the amount of $140,000 routed through Crestline Capital Advisors. My signature was at the bottom of the last page. I recognized it. I remembered signing it. I had believed when Elena placed it in front of me 18 months ago that it was a medical expense authorization form. My hands were not steady. I took the photograph anyway. The second document was a court filing. The header read, Multnomah County Circuit Court, and the case number was followed by the notation, sealed by order of the court. The body of the document was a motion to seal financial records related to a power of attorney proceeding filed by an attorney named Derek Foss of Foss and Associates, Southwest Broadway, Portland. The motion had been granted. Whatever records existed about the transfer of my 401k through that POA had been legally sealed from public access. Derek Foss. The name Brody had mentioned yesterday, the one I hadn't recognized. Now I had a face for it, or at least a firm name and an address. The third document was a financial statement from an account I did not recognize, showing a series of deposits over the past 14 months, amounts ranging from $12,000 to $68,000, totaling just over $340,000. The account holder name had been partially redacted on this copy, but the routing number was visible. I photographed all 3 documents carefully. Then I replaced the envelope exactly as I had found. It stepped back from the closet and looked around the room one more time. Julian lived here. My son, who had climbed Mount Hood at 23 and could name every peak in the Cascades from memory, was sleeping in this room every night with a locked mini refrigerator in the corner and a pill organizer on his nightstand and curtains that stayed closed in the middle of the day. My eyes burned. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth for a moment and breathed through my nose. Don't fall apart. Not here, not now. I checked the time on my phone. 10:51 a.m. I had been in the house for 28 minutes. I moved back through the hallway, down the stairs, through the living room, and out the front door. I locked it behind me with Julian's key and walked back to the Subaru at the same even pace I had used coming in. I sat in the driver's seat and immediately forwarded all 12 photographs to Detective Brody's number, along with a single text. Inside the Irvington house. Found documents and a locked refrigerator. Sending photos now. Call me. My phone buzzed 11 seconds later. Brody's voice was tight and immediate when I answered. Mr. Vance, where are you right now? In my car outside. I'm leaving now. Good. Don't go back in. A pause. The sound of him moving a door closing. The refrigerator, did you touch it? No, only photographed through the gap. Good. That's good. Another pause. The court seal order the filing by Derek Foss. I need you to text me that case number the moment you get home. I'll pull it up from the photo as soon as I'm back. Mr. Vance. His voice dropped half a register. You did the right thing by not taking anything. I want you to understand that what you photographed today, the seal order, the mortgage document, the recovery drink label, that is exactly the kind of corroborating evidence that moves a preliminary inquiry to a full investigation. A beat. We're past preliminary now. I started the car. outside the oaks on Northeast 7th Avenue, were shedding their last leaves in the gray November wind, and the Stanton Street house sat quiet and sealed behind me, giving nothing away. "How much time do we have?" I asked. 13 days, Brody said. "As of today." I pulled away from the curb and drove south toward the bridge, toward Selwood, toward the kitchen table where my maps were spread and my notes were waiting, and the clock on the wall was counting down 13 days, 1 second at a time. The kitchen table looked like a command center. I had not intended it to become one, but somewhere between Sunday night and Tuesday morning, it had transformed on its own, the way a river changes course, not through any single dramatic event, but through the slow, persistent accumulation of small redirections. My financial documents were spread across the left side, organized by date. My moleskin notebooks. I was on the second one now, having filled the first entirely since Thursday, were stacked in the center. My laptop sat open at the far end, with the 12 photographs from the Irvington house already uploaded and sorted into a folder I had labeled, with the particular grim humor of a man who taught geography for 22 years, Field Observations, November 2024. I sat down, pulled up the photograph of the court seal order, and found the case number in the upper right corner of the document. I texted it to Brody at 11:52 a.m. with a single line case number from the seal order, Derek Foss and Associates, Southwest Broadway. His reply came back in 4 minutes. "Got it. Running it now. Stay put." I made a sandwich, ham and mustard on sourdough, the kind of functional, no-nonsense lunch that Carol had always made fun of me for eating, and ate it standing at the counter because I was too restless to sit down again. Outside the kitchen window, the backyard was gray and bare, Carol's rose bushes reduced to dark sticks in the November cold. I had meant to cut them back in October. I hadn't gotten around to it. There were a lot of things I hadn't gotten around to since Thursday. I called Raymond at 12:15 p.m. He picked up on the second ring. "Victor, how'd it go this morning?" "I was inside the house," I said. "I found things." A brief pause, the pause of a man recalibrating quickly. "Tell me." I walked him through everything. The pill organizer, the locked mini refrigerator, the ClearFlow label. When I got to the label, "for clinical use only," not for retail sale, Raymond made a sound that wasn't quite a word, but carried a great deal of meaning. "ClearFlow Professional Series?" he repeated. "Hold on." I heard him moving the scrape of a chair, the sound of a door, footsteps on what I recognized as the hardwood hallway of his house in Multnomah Village. Then he came back. "I'm going to call someone. Give me an hour." "Raymond, an hour, Victor. Make another sandwich. I'll call you back." He hung up. I looked at the phone for a moment, then looked at my half-eaten sandwich, then put the bread back in the bag and went to sit at the kitchen table with my second moleskin and a pen. I wrote for 40 minutes straight, everything I could remember, from inside the Irvington house, every detail of every room I had passed through, the exact position of the pill organizer on the nightstand, the brand name on the mini-fridge, the color of the curtains, the smell of the air. I wrote it the way I had trained my students to write field observations, without interpretation, without conclusion, just pure documented fact. Interpretation could come later. Right now, I needed the record. Raymond called back at 1:28 p.m. "I talked to Phil Garner," he said. Phil Garner, I didn't recognize the name, and Raymond caught that immediately. Former pharmaceutical compliance officer. Worked with me on 2 fraud cases in 2016 and 2018. Retired now, but he still knows his stuff. I described the label to him: ClearFlow Performance Recovery Professional Series, clinical use only. A pause. "Victor, that product line was pulled from the approved vendor list of the Oregon Health Authority in 2021. It was flagged for containing unregulated concentrations of gamma-hydroxybutyrate derivatives, GHB-adjacent compounds. Legal in controlled clinical settings under very specific protocols, but not for unsupervised home use and absolutely not for long-term continuous administration." The kitchen felt very quiet. I pressed the phone harder against my ear. GHB derivatives, I repeated. That's a central nervous system depressant, Raymond said, and his voice had gone flat and professional in the way it did when he was delivering findings rather than conversation. In therapeutic doses used legitimately for certain sleep disorders and post-surgical recovery. In sustained, unmonitored doses, particularly administered over weeks or months, it produces exactly what you described with Julian. Cognitive fog, memory gaps, emotional flatness, compliance. The person continues to function on a surface level, but loses the capacity for independent critical judgment. I set my pen down on the notebook. My hand was shaking too much to write anyway. Raymond, I said, he's been on this for months. I know. His voice was quiet. I know, Victor. I pressed my free hand flat on the kitchen table and breathed. In through the nose, 4 counts. Out through the mouth, 4 counts. The technique Carol's doctor had taught her for anxiety in the last year of her life, which she had passed on to me with characteristic practicality. It works, Victor. Don't be too proud to use it. I was not too proud. I used it now. What do I do with this? I asked when I trusted my voice again. You call Brody, and you tell him exactly what I just told you, including Phil Garner's name and credentials. Phil will talk to him directly if needed. A pause. This is medical evidence now, Victor. This isn't just financial fraud. This is deliberate, sustained administration of a controlled substance to an incapacitated person. That's a different category of crime. I was already reaching for my phone to open a text to Brody when a new message arrived. I didn't recognize the number. Portland area code 503. But the name in the message header read Foss and Associates, Portland, Oregon. I stared at it for a moment before I opened it. The message was 3 sentences long. Professionally worded, no profanity, no explicit threat. But the meaning under it was as clear as a road on a map. So, Mr. Vance, it has come to our attention that you have been making inquiries regarding legal proceedings in which our office has appeared as counsel. The power of attorney document executed on behalf of Julian Vance is a fully valid legal instrument, and any attempt to interfere with its administration may expose you to legal liability. We would strongly advise you to consult with your own attorney before taking further action. I read it 3 times. My jaw was tight enough to ache. Derek Foss, the man whose name I had found on a court seal order in my son's bedroom closet 2 hours ago, knew that I had been looking at that case. He knew it fast enough to send a message before I had even finished eating lunch, which meant he had some kind of notification system on the public record query, a flag on the case number that alerted him when someone pulled it up. That wasn't the action of a lawyer with a clean conscience. That was the action of a man who was watching for exactly this. I forwarded the message to Brody immediately and called him. He picked up on the first ring. I see it, he said before I could speak. I'm looking at it right now. He knew within 2 hours, I said. He had a watch on the case number. Yes. Brody's voice was measured. Mr. Vance, I want you to understand something. The fact that Foss sent this message is not a setback. It means he's nervous. People who are operating legally don't set watch notifications on court records and fire off warning messages to private citizens within 2 hours of a query. A brief pause. It also means he's now communicated directly with you in a documented way using his firm's identity in connection with the POA proceedings. That is a thread we can pull. Raymond also has information about the ClearFlow product, I said. I'll send you his contact, Phil Garner, former pharmaceutical compliance officer. He can speak to the chemical composition. Send it now. The sound of typing in the background. Mr. Vance, I need you to do one more thing for me today. Write down the exact time you received Foss's message, the exact phone number it came from, and the exact wording. Don't paraphrase. I need a verbatim record. Already done. I said, looking at the open moleskin in front of me where I had been transcribing the message as we spoke. There was a brief pause on the line, shorter than a second, but I heard something in it. Something that might, in a different context, have been called approval. 12 days, Mr. Vance, Brody said. Go home, lock your door, and don't respond to Foss. I'm already home, I said, and I won't. I set the phone down and looked at the message from Foss still open on my screen. 3 sentences, professionally worded, and underneath every carefully chosen word, the unmistakable sound of a man who knew he was running out of time. The difference between us, I thought, was that he didn't yet know that I knew it too. I picked up my pen, turned to a fresh page in the moleskin, and wrote the date, the time, and a single heading at the top, Derek Foss, Foss and Associates. Then I underlined it twice and started writing. 12 days. Before I reveal the identity of the mysterious stranger, the police wanted me to meet the one holding the key to exposing Elena's entire plot. Please comment the number 11 below so I know you're still here with me on this journey. Also, please note, the following part of the story contains some fictional elements and may not be entirely factual. If you do not wish to continue, you may turn off the video right here. The 3 days between Tuesday and Saturday had been the longest of my life since the week Carol died. I had done what Brody told me to do. I had stayed home. I had not driven to Irvington. I had not called Julian's number. Elena would have answered, and I had nothing to say to Elena that would help anyone right now. I had eaten meals I didn't taste, slept in fragments, and spent the daylight hours at the kitchen table going through my notes, with the methodical persistence of a man who has run out of anything else to do. I had reorganized my financial documents twice. I had reread my moleskin entries so many times that certain pages had started to soften at the corners. Raymond had called on Wednesday evening to tell me that Brody's team had pulled the seal order, that Phil Garner had spoken directly with a detective in Brody's unit, and that the forensic analysis of the Clearflow label photograph was being processed. On Thursday, Brody had sent a single text, making progress. Sit tight. On Friday, nothing which Raymond told me meant Brody was moving fast enough that he didn't have time to update me, which was a good sign, not a bad one. I had tried to believe that. Then Saturday morning at 8:47 a.m. my phone rang. Mr. Vance! Brody's voice was different, not louder, not faster, but charged with something underneath the professional composure. The way a room sounds when every light has been turned on at once. Can you come to the precinct this morning? There's someone I'd like you to meet. I was in the car before he finished the sentence. Brody met me in the lobby at 9:33 a.m. and led me not to the second-floor conference room we had used on Monday, but to a larger room on the 3rd floor, a proper interview room with better lighting and a longer table. As we came through the door, a young man sitting on the far side of the table stood up. He was 32 or 33, lean, and slightly too thin in the way of someone who hadn't been eating well for a while. He had dark circles under brown eyes that held a particular expression I recognized immediately, the expression of someone who has been trying to get someone to listen to them for a very long time and has almost stopped believing that anyone will. He was wearing a plain gray jacket over a blue shirt, and he was holding a coffee cup in both hands, the way you hold something when your hands need something to do. Victor Vance, Brody said, this is Thomas Dawson, Linda Dawson's son. The name hit me in the chest like a cold wave. Linda Dawson, the name I had first heard through the crack of a hospital corridor door 8 days ago, spoken by Elena in the tone of a completed task. The woman whose obituary I had found at midnight in my living room, sitting alone with a lukewarm cup of chamomile tea and a growing sense of dread. Her son was standing 3 feet away from me. I crossed the room and extended my hand. Thomas Dawson shook it. His grip was firm, but his hand was cold, the cold of someone who had been sitting still and anxious for a while. Up close, I could see the resemblance to the brief, sparse obituary photo I had found. The same set of the jaw, the same directness in the eyes. I'm sorry about your mother, I said. My voice came out lower than I intended. Something moved across Thomas Dawson's face, a brief, involuntary tightening around the eyes. The expression of a man who has heard those words many times and has learned to absorb them without breaking. "Thank you," he said. Then quietly, she tried to warn people. No one listened. We sat down. Brody placed a laptop on the table between us, connected to a small external drive, a standard USB flash drive, in a clear evidence bag. "Thomas contacted our department on Thursday," Brody said, "after Raymond Shaw reached out to him through a mutual contact in Beaverton. He drove to Portland yesterday evening and came in first thing this morning." He looked at Thomas. "I'll let you explain what you brought." Thomas set his coffee cup down and straightened slightly in his chair. When he spoke, his voice was steady, the steadiness of someone who has rehearsed this moment many times in their head, who has been waiting for exactly this room and exactly this conversation. "My mother was a librarian for 31 years, he said. "She retired in 2019. She was meticulous, organized, the kind of person who kept records of everything, not because she was paranoid, but because that was just how her mind worked." He paused. "When she got sick in early 2023, I came back to Beaverton to help. I thought it was a standard illness. The doctors said her organs were under stress. They said it was age-related decline." He stopped. His jaw tightened. He looked at the table for a moment before continuing. "2 weeks before she passed, she called me into the room and handed me a USB drive. She said, 'Thomas, if anything happens to me, you take this to someone who will actually do something with it. Don't let it sit in a drawer.' I asked her what was on it. She said she'd been keeping records. She said she thought she understood what was happening to her, but she couldn't prove it alone." My hands were very still on the table. I was watching Thomas the way I used to watch students delivering presentations, listening not just to the words, but to the architecture underneath them, the structure of what they were trying to say. "I tried," Thomas said. His voice cracked slightly on the word, and he pressed his lips together for a moment. "I went to the Beaverton Police Department twice. The first time they said it wasn't enough to open a case. The second time they said the medical examiner had found no evidence of foul play, and the case was closed." He looked up at me directly. "She was 64 years old, and she was healthy. She hiked every weekend. She didn't just decline." Brody reached over and opened the laptop. "Our forensic team accessed the USB drive last night," he said. "I want to walk you both through what we found." The spreadsheet filled the screen. It was Linda Dawson's work. I could feel it in the structure of it, the careful librarian's precision of the layout. Column headers in bold name. Date of contact. Injury/incident. Settlement amount. Facilitator. Medical provider. Status. 11 rows of data, each one representing a person. 11 people whose names I didn't know, whose faces I couldn't see, but whose situations reading across each row told a story that was as clear and cold as any map I had ever read. Row 9 was Linda Dawson's own name. She had documented herself. Settlement amount $1.8 million from an auto accident claim in 2021. Facilitator Elena Dawson. Medical provider Arthur Sterling, MD. Status funds transferred. Account closed. Case unresolved. I pressed 2 fingers against my mouth and breathed through my nose. The last row, row 11, made my vision blur for a moment at the edges. Julian Vance. Accident date May 2024. Settlement amount $4 million. Facilitator Elena Vance Dawson. Medical provider Arthur Sterling. MD. Status pre-disbursement. Protocol escalation Phase 3, post-settlement. Phase 3, post-settlement. The thing that had been building in my chest since Thursday of the previous week, since the moment I had pressed my ear against the gap of a hospital corridor door, and heard my daughter-in-law's voice discuss my son's life like a line item on a spreadsheet finally broke loose, and I felt it move through me like a wave breaking against a seawall. Not panic, not rage. Something older and deeper and harder than either of those, the pure, undiluted grief of a father looking at his son's name in a column labeled pre-disbursement and understanding fully and finally exactly what that meant. I did not cry, but it was very close. Thomas was watching me from across the table with an expression that told me he understood exactly what I was feeling, because he had felt it himself sitting in this same kind of room looking at his mother's name in that same column. "She put Julian on this list," I said. My voice was barely above a normal speaking volume. "She knew about my son. She must have found his name somewhere in the network," Thomas said. "She didn't explain all of it to me before." He stopped, cleared his throat. "She just said there were others, that she wasn't the only one." Brody leaned forward. His voice was measured and clear, the voice of a man who understood that this moment required precision, not comfort. "Mr. Vance, what this spreadsheet gives us, combined with the photographic evidence, the financial records, the ClearFlow documentation, and the seal order filing, is what we call a pattern of conduct across multiple victims. That is the evidentiary threshold for a conspiracy charge as opposed to a single incident fraud case." He paused. "I am applying for an arrest warrant for Elena Vance today." The words landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. "Today," I repeated. "The application goes to a Multnomah County judge this afternoon. Standard processing time is 48 hours for a case of this complexity, which puts us at Monday morning." He looked at me steadily. 9 days before the disbursement. That is enough time." 9 days. I looked at the spreadsheet still filling the laptop screen. 11 names. 11 people, and Linda Dawson had seen it, had documented. It had pressed a USB drive into her son's hands 2 weeks before she died and told him to find someone who would listen. I turned to Thomas. He was looking at the screen too, his jaw set, his hands around the coffee cup gone still. "She would have wanted to know this is being used," I said. Thomas looked at me. His eyes were red at the rims, but his expression was steady, the steadiness of someone who has been holding something heavy for a long time and has finally found somewhere to set it down. "Yeah," he said quietly. "She would have." A breath. "She really would have." Brody closed the laptop. "Mr. Vance, I need you to go home. I need you to act completely normally for the next 48 hours, no changes in your contact pattern with Elena, no unusual behavior. If she suspects anything has shifted, she may move the timeline forward." He looked at me with the level, direct expression I had come to recognize as his version of gravity. "Can you do that?" I thought about Julian's voice on Sunday night. The fog in it. The question about the house. I feel like I've been watching my own life from the other side of a window. "Yes," I said. "I can do that." I shook Thomas Dawson's hand again before I left. He held it a beat longer than necessary, not dramatically, not with any performance. Just the grip of one person to another who understood, without needing to say it out loud, that they were fighting the same thing for the same reason. I walked out of the central precinct and into the cold November morning, and the city of Portland spread itself out around me, the Willamette somewhere to the east. The West Hills rising in gray-green layers to the west, and somewhere between them, on a quiet street in Irvington, my son was sitting in a room with the curtains drawn. 48 hours. I got in the Subaru and pointed it south toward Selwood, and I drove home and I waited. Sunday had moved with the particular cruelty of days that matter slowly without mercy, each hour longer than the last. I had done everything Brody told me to do. I had stayed home. I had not changed my routine. I had made my coffee in the morning, walked to the end of Martin Street, and back the way I did every day. Eaten lunch at the kitchen table, read 3 pages of a book I couldn't remember the plot of. I had called Raymond once in the afternoon, and he had said the same thing he always said when there was nothing new to report. No news is good news, Victor. Let the man work. I had tried. I genuinely had. But by 6 in the evening, I had given up the pretense of reading and was sitting in Carol's armchair by the front window, the chair she had claimed for herself within the first week of us moving into the Selwood house in 1987. The one with the faded blue upholstery and the armrest she had worn smooth over 30 years of reading, watching the rain work its way down the glass and trying not to count the seconds. My phone rang at 6:22 p.m. Brody, I answered so fast I nearly dropped it. Brody, Mr. Vance. His voice was different still, composed, still professional, but underneath the composure, there was something that had not been there before. Something that sounded in its careful, restrained way like the particular release of tension that comes when something that has been wound very tight for a very long time finally gives. Elena Vance is in custody. The room tilted. I gripped the armrest of Carol's chair with my free hand and held on. My ears were ringing slightly, the way they do sometimes, when something too large to process arrives all at once. Say that again, I said, even though I had heard him perfectly. Elena Vance was taken into custody at the Irvington residence approximately 40 minutes ago, Brody said. The warrant was signed at 4:15 this afternoon by Judge Harold Whitmore, emergency review based on evidence of imminent financial transfer activity detected by our forensic team on the Crestline Capital accounts. A pause. She did not resist. She has requested an attorney. I pressed the phone so hard against my ear that it hurt. Julian, I said. Where is Julian? He's being transported to Providence Portland Medical Center right now. Standard protocol when a residence is secured and a vulnerable party is present. Brody's voice was careful and clear. Mr. Vance, I want to prepare you. Julian has been under continuous exposure to the compounds we identified for an extended period. He is conscious and he is communicating, but he is going to be disoriented for some time. The medical team will assess him fully once he arrives. I need to go to him. Yes, Brody said simply. You can. Providence is on N.E. Glisson Street. I'll let the attending team know you're coming. A brief pause. Mr. Vance, there is one more thing I need to tell you. Something in his tone made me go still. Tell me, Dr. Arthur Sterling was not at the Irvington residence when we executed the warrant. His apartment in the South Park blocks has been vacated. Based on a credit card transaction flagged by our financial team, he purchased a one-way airline ticket this afternoon from PDX. A pause that felt carefully measured. The destination was Nassau, Bahamas. The warmth that had begun spreading through my chest at the word custody contracted sharply. He ran. He is attempting to, Brody said. We are pursuing the appropriate channels, but I want you to be aware of this development so you are not surprised if you hear about it. His voice was steady. Go see your son, Mr. Vance. Let me handle Sterling. I was already standing, already reaching for my coat on the rack by the front door, the same rack where I had hung it every night since Thursday. The same rack where Julian used to hang his own coat when he came for Sunday dinners, before Elena, before the accident, before all of this. Brody, I said. Yes, thank you. The words came out rougher than I intended, weighted with 10 days of fear and sleepless nights, and the particular exhaustion of a man who has been fighting alone in a direction he wasn't entirely sure was right. I mean that. A brief pause. Drive carefully, Mr. Vance. The roads are wet. Providence Portland Medical Center on N.E. Glisson Street was 20 minutes from Selwood on a dry night. Tonight, with the rain coming down in steady sheets and my hands not entirely steady on the wheel, it took me 26. I parked in the visitor structure and walked through the entrance at 7:04 p.m., gave Julian's name at the front desk, and was directed to the 4th floor. A nurse met me at the elevator, a woman in her 40s with a calm, unhurried manner, that told me she had delivered difficult news to families many times and knew exactly how to stand in a hallway without making the person she was talking to feel more frightened than they already were. "Mr. Vance," she said, "I'm Karen, your son's attending nurse. He's stable, and he's asking for you." She paused. "I want to let you know before you go in, he's going to seem a little foggy still. That's normal, and it's temporary. The compounds we're working to clear from his system take time. He knows where he is, and he recognizes people, but his short-term recall is still patchy." She looked at me with clear, direct eyes. "He's been asking for you specifically since they brought him in." My throat closed entirely. I nodded because speech was not available to me at that moment. She led me down the hallway to room 412 and pushed the door open. Julian was in the bed by the window, propped up on 2 pillows, an IV line in his left arm. He was thinner than the last time I had seen him, noticeably thinner, in the way of someone who has been eating without appetite for months, and there were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before the accident. His dark hair needed cutting. His hands resting on top of the blanket were the hands of a man in his late 20s who had spent a significant portion of the previous 6 months lying still. But his eyes, when they found me in the doorway, were his eyes, clearer than they had been on the phone last Sunday. Present aware, and when he recognized me, crumpling at the edges in a way that told me he was fighting very hard not to cry. "Dad," he said. I crossed the room in 4 steps and sat down in the chair beside the bed and took both his hands in mine, and whatever composure I had been holding together across 10 days and 2 notebooks and 48 hours of waiting came apart quietly and completely. I did not sob, I did not make a scene. I simply sat there with my son's hands in mine and let the tears go without trying to stop them, because there was no geography teacher's composure in the world strong enough for this particular moment. And I had decided somewhere between the parking structure and room 412 that I was not going to try. "Hey," Julian said. His voice was thick. He squeezed my hands with a grip that was weaker than it used to be, but unmistakably his. "Hey, Dad, I'm okay. I know I managed. I know you are. I don't entirely understand what happened." He shook his head slowly, carefully, the way someone moves when they're not entirely sure of their own equilibrium. "They told me Elena was that she was taken by police. I keep trying to make it make sense, and it keeps not making sense." "It will," I said. "I'll explain everything. Not tonight, you just rest. But I promise you, Julian, I will explain all of it." He looked at me for a long moment. His eyes were wet at the rims, but his jaw was set, and underneath the fog and the exhaustion and the bewilderment, I could see something else, something that had survived 6 months of whatever Elena and Arthur had done to him. The particular stubbornness of a man who climbs mountains, not because they are easy, but because they are there. "You figured it out," he said, not a question. "Yes. How long have you known?" 10 days, I said. "I'm sorry it wasn't sooner." Julian shook his head. 10 days, he repeated softly. He let out a long, slow breath and looked at the ceiling. Then he looked back at me, and despite everything, the IV line, the shadows under his eyes, the thinness, the fog that was still clearing at its own pace, he almost smiled. "Dad," he said, "you're 67 years old." 67, I confirmed. "You figured out a financial fraud scheme in 10 days. "I had help," I said. He squeezed my hands again. This time the grip was stronger. "You always say that," he said. "You never mean it." And despite everything, despite the IV line and the fluorescent hospital lights and the rain against the 4th-floor window, and the knowledge that Arthur Sterling was somewhere over the Pacific right now, in a plane with a fake passport, I laughed. It came out surprised and slightly ragged, the laugh of a man who hadn't laughed in 10 days, but it was real, and it filled the small hospital room, and Julian's almost smile became a real one, brief and tired, and completely his. Brody called at 8:47 p.m. while I was still sitting in the chair beside Julian's bed. I stepped into the hallway to take it. Sterling's flight lands in Nassau in approximately 6 hours, Brody said. I've been in contact with the Bahamian authorities and Interpol. There is a process in place. He paused. Mr. Vance, I need you to be at the precinct tomorrow morning at 9. We have work to do. I'll be there, I said. I went back into room 412. Julian had fallen asleep, genuinely asleep, not the artificial fog sleep of the past 6 months, but the deep, even breathing of a man whose body had finally decided it was safe to rest. I sat back down in the chair beside the bed. The rain was still coming down outside the window, steady and unhurried, the way Portland rain always is in November. I picked up my moleskin from my coat pocket and opened it to a fresh page. At the top I wrote the date and the time. Then beneath it I wrote 3 words. Julian is safe. I underlined them twice. Then I closed the notebook, leaned back in the chair, and for the first time in 10 days, I closed my eyes. Monday, November 18th, 2024, Portland Police Bureau, Southwest 2nd Avenue, Portland. I had slept 3 hours in a hospital chair and was sitting across from Brody by 9 o'clock with precinct coffee that tasted like it had been brewed sometime during the previous administration. He didn't waste time. Sterling had landed at Lynden Pindling International Airport in Nassau at 2:47 a.m. local time, clearing customs on a passport belonging to Harold Myers, a retired professor from Missoula, Montana, 14 months deceased, no immediate family. Sterling was still on the island waiting. Brody believed he was waiting for confirmation that the $4 million disbursement had cleared. Once the money moves, he'll attempt a second leg, Brody said, to a jurisdiction without an extradition agreement, which means we have a window, I said. Brody had filed an Interpol Red Notice request at 6 a.m. through the DOJ's Office of International Affairs. The U.S.-Bahamas extradition treaty covered financial fraud conspiracy and identity document offenses. The faster path, he explained, was intercepting Sterling at the airport before a second departure, but the Royal Bahamas Police Force had been positioned at arrivals, not departures. I asked to see the flight record. Brody slid it across. I opened my moleskin and drew a quick sketch, the kind I had put on classroom whiteboards for 2 decades. Lynden Pindling has 2 international terminals and a single international departures checkpoint. If Sterling was moving commercially, he had 1 choke point to pass through. Charter was faster, but harder to arrange quietly. Commercial was trackable. If your Bahamian contacts reposition to international departures, I said, they reduce his exit to 1 option. Brody looked at the sketch, picked up his phone, and made 1 call. He gave his badge number, the case reference, and said calmly, redirect positioning international departures, not arrivals. He ended the call and looked at me. 22 years, he said. 22 years, I confirmed. Raymond arrived at 11. He looked at me across the table and said, you look terrible. Thank you, Raymond. How's Julian? Stable. He made a joke last night about my age. Raymond's face did something complicated. He understood exactly how much that small, ordinary moment carried. Brody's phone rang at 11:34 a.m. He stood turned slightly away and listened for 4 minutes. Raymond and I did not speak. I held my pen over a fresh page without writing, because writing required a certainty I didn't yet have. Brody turned back. Sterling attempted to purchase a ticket at the Copa Airlines counter at 11:09 a.m. Nassau time. He was intercepted at the International Departures checkpoint at 11:22 a.m. A pause. He is in custody. My pen touched the page. I wrote 1 word, Sterling underlined it, noted the time, and pressed both palms flat on the table. Raymond put his hand on my forearm. The departure checkpoint, he said quietly, glancing at the torn corner of my sketch, still visible in Brody's folder. Your idea. 22 years, I said. Brody sat back down. The Crestline accounts would be fully frozen by Tuesday. The $4 million disbursement would be intercepted and held in a protected court account. 7 days left on the clock, and it no longer mattered. "Mr. Vance," Brody said. I looked at him. "Go back to the hospital. Your son is awake." Monday, November 18th, 2024, Providence, Portland Medical Center, Northeast Glisson Street, Portland. Julian was sitting up when I pushed the door open. IV in his left arm, hospital coffee in both hands, eyes clear. When he saw me, his face did something it hadn't done in months. It simply opened. No delay, no fog, just Julian fully present. "You came back," he said. "I told you I would." I pulled the chair close and told him everything. From the beginning, the OHSU corridor. Elena's voice saying Linda Dawson's name like a closed file. The rain-soaked drive to Selwood, the PSU archive, the Seattle conference photograph. The freight train at 9 in the morning. Cafe Nell and Raymond Shaw. The locked mini refrigerator and the 3 documents in the closet. Thomas Dawson and the USB drive and the spreadsheet with 11 names with his name at the bottom. Julian Vance, $4 million, protocol escalation, phase 3, Elena's arrest. Arthur Sterling's flight to Nassau. It took 40 minutes. Julian didn't interrupt once. When I finished, the room was quiet. "The diffuser," he said finally. "She said it was for relaxation." He set the coffee down. I thought the fog was the injury. I kept apologizing to her for not healing fast enough. He paused. I was apologizing to her. I put my hand on his arm. "You were being kept that way deliberately. The moment the diffuser stopped, you called me. Your first clear moment in months, and you used it to reach out. That's exactly who you are." His jaw worked. "Then, what happens to Robert?" "He's safe. DHS placed him with a foster family in Northeast Portland. His biological father may have parental rights." I paused. "He used to bring you water in the mornings." "He thought he was helping," Julian said quietly. "He was." Tuesday, November 19th, 2024, Selwood Moreland, Portland, Oregon. I found it when I hung up my coat. My hand went into the right pocket, the way it always does, the 40-year habit of checking for keys, and my fingers closed around a flat envelope that I had not put there. I stood in the hallway and did not move. My mind ran backward through the afternoon, the precinct, the parking structure at Providence, the B1 corridor, where I had stopped to take Dr. Lawson's call. A man in a gray jacket had passed me on the left, close enough to brush my shoulder. I had been too focused on Julian's blood results to register it as anything but ordinary courtesy. I called Brody without touching the envelope again. He listened. "Then don't open it. Don't touch the coat. I'm sending someone now." Officer Gallagher arrived at 3:49 p.m. and handled everything with the quiet efficiency of someone for whom chain of custody was second nature. She photographed the coat inside the drawer, carefully moved the envelope into a sealed evidence bag, using sterile tongs, and had me sign a formal chain of custody log. Brody called at 4:31 p.m., confirming the envelope contained $4,000 in untraceable bills. "It's a desperate move to claim you took a payoff to alter your testimony," Brody explained. "But with the fingerprint analysis we're running, this just handed us a federal obstruction charge against Foss." When I visited Julian later, the weight was lifting. "Brody's shifting the protective custody details tomorrow," I told him. "You're completely safe now." He nodded slowly, and I watched something release in his shoulders. Then he looked at the window. "I remember signing things," he said quietly. "I don't remember understanding them." He paused. 11 people. She did this to 11 people. "Yes, we should do something for them, for Linda, when this is over." "We will," I said. Wednesday, November 20th, 2024, Providence, Portland Medical Center, Northeast Glisson Street, Portland. Dr. Rebecca Lawson met me in the hallway outside room 412 at 9:15 in the morning. She was holding a folder and wearing the expression of someone who had prepared carefully for a conversation and intended to have it properly. "I want to go over the full results with both of you together," she said. But there's one piece I need you to understand first. She turned the folder toward me. A printed toxicology report dense with numbers I couldn't read fluently, but that she clearly could. The panel confirms 2 compounds in Julian's system, she said. A GHB derivative analog and a benzodiazepine, both administered continuously over several months. Both are clearing cleanly. Full clearance within 4 to 5 days. She paused. But Julian's magnesium and zinc levels are significantly elevated. In most long-term exposure cases, we see depletion. Julian's are the opposite. High enough that our team believes they provided meaningful metabolic competition with the GHB compound, reducing its effective absorption at the receptor level. She looked at me directly. Something Julian was eating consistently and over time was slowing down what was being done to him. I thought about the garden on Martin Street, the kale that had survived 3 frosts, the butternut squash, the spinach in the shaded corner by the fence, the bags I had carried to Irvington every week for a year because I didn't know what else to do, and because driving to see my son, with something to give him, was at least a reason to see his face. I bring him vegetables, I said, every week, from my garden. Dr. Lawson looked at me for a moment. Then she closed the folder slowly. That would be consistent, she said quietly. We told Julian together. He listened to the full explanation without interrupting. Then he looked at me. The vegetables, he said. The vegetables, I confirmed. He pressed his lips together hard. His jaw worked. His eyes went bright, and then despite everything he laughed. A real one. The full laugh I had not heard since before the accident, starting in his chest and coming out surprised and too loud for the room. Dad, he said, you saved my life with kale. And squash, I said. Don't forget the squash. Brody called at 11:22 a.m. The TRO was dissolved. Foss had been formally charged. Elena's arraignment was set for November 25th. I wrote it all down. Then at the bottom of the page, smaller than the rest, Carol would have found this very funny. September 2025. Multnomah County Courthouse, Southwest 4th Avenue, Portland. September arrived the way Portland Septembers always do, the heavy summer heat breaking into early autumn rain. It had taken 10 long months of federal grand jury indictments, bank forensic audits, and endless pretrial discovery. But the trial of Elena Marie Vance finally began on a crisp Tuesday morning. The Multnomah County Courthouse on Southwest 4th Avenue is a building that takes itself seriously. High ceilings, marble floors worn smooth by decades of people walking and carrying things they needed resolved. I had driven past it hundreds of times in 30 years of living in this city. I had never had a reason to go inside. I had a reason now. He had been out of Providence for 10 months, was walking without a cane, and had gained back 8 of the 12 pounds he had lost. He was not fully himself yet, but he was getting there one day at a time, the same way mountains get climbed. The prosecuting attorney was a woman named Claire Ashworth, composed, precise, the kind of lawyer who does not waste a single word. Her opening statement lasted 41 minutes and covered every piece of evidence Brody's team had assembled: the USB drive, the Clearflow compound, the photographic record, the 3 identities, the 11 prior victims. She named Linda Dawson. She named Thomas Dawson, who sat 3 rows behind us, and nodded once when his mother's name was read into the record. Elena's defense attorney presented an insanity defense, claiming his client suffered from a dissociative disorder that rendered her unable to understand the nature of her actions. Elena sat at the defense table, looking at the middle distance with an expression of carefully arranged vacancy that I recognized immediately, because I had been a teacher for 22 years, and I knew exactly what a performance looked like. On the 3rd day of testimony, the USB drive was entered into evidence. Claire Ashworth displayed the spreadsheet on the courtroom screen, all 11 rows, all 11 names, the columns of dates and amounts and status notations. The courtroom was very quiet. I looked at the screen. I looked at Julian beside me. His jaw was set, and his hands were still on his knees, and his eyes were dry. But he was leaning forward slightly, the same posture he used on a mountain when the summit was close enough to see. Brody had told me the night before the trial began, the evidence is what it is. It was. Julian took the stand on a Wednesday. He walked to the witness box without a cane, moving carefully, but steadily, the way he had always moved on difficult terrain, deliberate, unhurried, each step placed with intention. He adjusted the microphone, looked at Claire Ashworth, and answered every question in the clear, direct voice of a man who had spent 2 months remembering how to trust his own mind again. He described the fog, the missing days, the mornings he woke up not knowing what month it was. He described signing documents he didn't understand, believing Elena when she said it was routine, trusting Arthur Sterling because Elena trusted him. He described Robert bringing him water every morning. He described the Sunday night the diffuser broke the window opening, in his mind the first clear thought in months, and the name that came to him without hesitation. Dad. In the gallery, I pressed my hand flat against my knee and breathed. The jury deliberated for 11 hours across 2 days. Guilty on 5 counts. Elena showed no reaction. The carefully arranged vacancy she had worn throughout the trial did not shift by a single degree. Her attorney placed a hand on her arm. She did not acknowledge it. Sentencing came 8 days later. Elena Vance received 30 years. Arthur Sterling extradited from Nassau 3 weeks prior, and having entered a plea agreement with the prosecution, received 18. Derek Foss, who had also entered a plea, received 8. The courtroom was quiet when the sentences were read. Not the held breath quiet of suspense, but something different. The quiet of a room full of people absorbing the weight of a conclusion. Thomas Dawson was 2 rows behind me. When the final sentence was announced, he let out a long, slow breath and pressed both hands over his face for a moment. Then he lowered them, and his eyes were wet, and he nodded once at no one in particular, at everything in general. "It's over," Julian said. I looked at him, at the courthouse behind us, at the pale sky above the West Hills. "The trial is," I said. He understood what I meant. He nodded. And then, because he was Julian, he put his arm around my shoulders carefully on account of his back, and we stood there together for a moment in the winter light, 2 people who had found their way back to the same side of the window. November 2025. Selwood Moorland, Portland, Oregon. Late autumn came to Selwood the way it always does, dropping the final amber leaves across the yard, cooling the earth in small, insistent increments. Exactly 1 year after the nightmare began, the garden was settling into its winter rest, but this time it was a peaceful dormancy. Julian came on a Saturday morning, walking through the back gate, with a pair of work gloves tucked under his arm, and a coffee from the place on Tacoma Street that he knew I liked. His back had healed well enough for light outdoor activity, his doctor said. Clearing the old summer growth was exactly what we had planned. We spent the morning clearing the beds for the upcoming freeze. Julian worked the south bed where the squash had been, and I worked the corner by the fence where the winter spinach was already holding its ground. Carol's rose bushes, neatly trimmed back to protect them from the approaching frost, stood quiet in the sharp November light, a clean slate waiting patiently for the spring that would inevitably return. Midway through the morning, my spade hit something hard. I cleared the soil around it and lifted it out a small plastic storage box, sealed with a rubber gasket, the kind designed to keep contents dry. Julian crouched beside me, reading my expression. "What is that?" "The beginning," I said. He looked at the box for a long moment. Then he looked at me. "What do we do with it?" I thought about Linda Dawson documenting 11 names in a spreadsheet and pressing a USB drive into her son's hands. I thought about Thomas driving from Beaverton, with that drive in his jacket pocket, having been turned away twice and coming back a 3rd time. "Thomas is registering the foundation next month," I said. "The Linda Dawson Fund for families dealing with financial elder abuse. They'll need documentation. They'll need the story told clearly." I paused. "I thought we might donate the originals." Julian was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once the way Thomas had nodded in the courtroom. We put the box aside and went back to work. The morning moved the way good mornings do, without hurry, without wait, the two of us working in the same companionable rhythm. We had always had the rhythm of people who know each other well enough not to need to fill the space between them. At some point, Julian said, without looking up from the soil, "You know what a compass does, Dad?" "I taught geography for 22 years, I said. He smiled. "It always points home." Looking back at this map of betrayal, I realized that God gave us gut instincts for a reason. Ignoring them is our greatest mistake. Don't be like me. Do not let blind trust silence your doubts until it is almost too late. I used to think these deep cautionary tales were just old grandpa stories told to pass the time. But this was our real painful family story. Maps can guide you, but only vigilance protects you. Every household carries hidden fault lines. If you find value in raw educational accounts like this family story, please drop a comment with your thoughts below, share this video with your loved ones, and subscribe to join our amazing community. Your incredible support keeps these vital grandpa stories alive. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end. This dark family story taught us that survival requires looking past a beautiful smile, which is why I continue to share these important grandpa stories. Please note that the upcoming videos in this series contain certain fictionalized elements carefully crafted for educational and entertainment purposes. If this narrative style does not align with your personal preferences, you are welcome to close this video now and choose other content better suited to your journey.